Racist cop arrests black man, shocked. He's the investigator. The recorder was running when the patrol car pulled up. Marcus Webb had been parked on that corner for 20 minutes. The folder on the passenger seat had a case number on the cover, no name, because the name was on every page inside, 23 times, attached to 23 stops and 6 arrests across a 4-block radius over 6 months. Marcus Webb was still documenting when Officer Derek Sable walked to the driver's side window. Sable ran the plates. Clean. The license. Clean. The name. Clean. He arrested Marcus Webb anyway. What Sable did not know was that he was stop number 24. What he did not know was that the folder he picked up and set on the hood without opening was the folder with his name on the first page. What he did not know was that Marcus had already made the call. 3 words. That was all it took. Something about this stays with you. Hit subscribe and drop a comment if something here won't stop echoing. And now we go back to where it started. The folder was open on the passenger seat. Marcus Webb had parked the gray sedan on the corner of Fulton and Lenox at 6:48 on a Thursday evening and had been sitting there for 20 minutes, not because he was lost and not because anything was wrong, but because 6:45 on a Thursday was when Officer Derek Sable typically began what his departmental logs called proactive pedestrian engagement on this block, and Marcus had been documenting those engagements one by one for 6 months. The folder was labeled with a case number only, no name on the outside. Inside, 23 documented stops, 14 searches, 6 arrests, all within a 4-block radius, all subjects black. 15 of the 23 stops had taken place within 1 hour of each other on consecutive Thursdays on this exact block. Marcus was 42 years old and had been with the department for 15 years. He had been with Internal Affairs for 3. In those 3 years, he had built 11 cases. 6 had gone to the DA. 4 had resulted in charges. Of the 11, none had taken longer to build than this one, and none had required him to park on a corner on 23 consecutive Thursday evenings eating takeout while documenting what a city had decided was policing. Marcus had pulled up the departmental patrol logs for the 39th precinct and cross-referenced them with the incident reports for each stop. In 12 of the 23 cases, the reason given for the stop was some variation of suspicious loitering. In 7 cases, the reason given was matching a description, though no description had been filed. In 4 cases, no reason was given at all. He had flagged those 4 for the DA as the cleanest examples. The DA had said, "Give me more." He had given the DA more. He picked up his digital recorder from the cup holder. Case update, November 14th, 6:50 p.m. I am at the northeast corner of Fulton and Lenox. Subject has not yet appeared on the block. Last observation, November 7th. Subject made contact with 3 individuals between 6:47 and 7:32 p.m. 1 search, no arrest. Adding notation to stop 22. Tonight, I will be positioned at the northeast corner rather than the lot on the south end. Better sightline to the mid-block crosswalk where most contacts initiate. He clicked off the recorder and set it on the case folder. The block was Thursday evening busy. A woman with a stroller at the light. A bodega owner pulling down the side awning. 2 teenage boys moving at the easy, deliberate pace of people who have learned not to move fast on this block after sundown. Marcus watched them. He had watched people like them 23 times from this car, and had written down what he saw and had not done anything else, because what he was doing required that he not do anything else, and because the doing of anything else was exactly how 6 months of documented evidence became inadmissible. He had not told the 2 teenagers that what had been happening to people who looked like them on this corner was being documented. He had not told them that they appeared in 5 different sections of a folder, sitting on a car seat 60 feet away. He had not told them this because he could not tell them this without destroying the thing that was supposed to protect them. This was a fact he carried the way a person carries something heavy that they have decided not to put down because the alternative is worse. Headlights came around the south end of the block. Marcus clocked the vehicle, a white department model patrol car, moving at the pace patrol cars move when they are looking rather than going. It came to a slow roll at the mid-block crosswalk. The two teenagers crossed to the south side without hurrying. The patrol car watched them. Then it turned north, toward Marcus's sedan. Marcus put his hands on the wheel. The patrol car pulled up behind him and stopped with its front bumper, approximately 4 feet from Marcus's rear bumper. Not a distance that suggested emergency. A distance that suggested deliberateness, the specific spatial positioning of an officer who wants you to know the calculation has already been made. The blue and white light bar activated. Marcus watched it in the rearview mirror without adjusting the mirror. He watched it the way a person watches something they have seen coming and have decided to observe rather than react to. He clicked the digital recorder on without looking at it and set it face down on the folder. Sable got out on the driver's side. His partner, Reyes, badge 447, got out on the passenger side. Sable walked to the driver's side window. Reyes hung back at the rear quarter panel, hands on belt. "Window," said Sable. Marcus lowered the window. Sable was 44 and looked it. Fair, solid through the chest, with the specifically cultivated posture of a man who had learned early that size and deliberateness together, read as authority. His badge caught the streetlight. 2219, exactly as documented. License and registration. Marcus produced both. He produced them without rushing and without the kind of rapid compliance that signals fear, because what he was experiencing was not fear. It was something more like the specific still attention of a person watching a mechanism operate that they know in very fine detail. Sable looked at the license. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the sedan, at the takeout bag in the cup holder, at the recorder lying face down on the folder on the passenger seat. "You live around here?" "No." "What are you doing on this block?" "Parked." Sable looked at the recorder on the folder again. He did not look at it with recognition. He looked at it the way a person looks at something unfamiliar that has not yet been assigned a category. Marcus noted Sable's eyes moving to the folder. He noted Reyes shifting weight. He noted the precise position of the patrol car's dash camera, which, based on the angle, would have a clear view of this window exchange. "Plates come up unusual," Sable said. "My plates," Marcus said. "They run unusual. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus looked at him. He was not afraid. He was not angry. He was doing something that looked from the outside like patience, but was from the inside something more careful. He was deciding exactly what he was going to do next, and in exactly what order, and the calculation took approximately 2 seconds. He opened the door. He got out. He did not look back at the folder. The air outside the sedan was cooler than the air inside it, and Marcus stood in it without adjusting to it. The streetlight above the joint was one of the older sodium fixtures that cast a particular amber over everything it touched. The hood of the patrol car, the painted curb, the face of the officer who had just asked Marcus to exit a vehicle that had been parked legally on a public street for 20 minutes. Marcus had documented this corner in 11 different lighting conditions. He knew what this light looked like in photographs. He knew which photographs would print clearly enough for a DA's presentation and which would need enhancement. He was thinking about this, specifically clinically. At the same moment, he was standing outside the car, because thinking about it was part of what he was there to do, and because the alternative to thinking carefully was to feel things he had decided he could not afford to feel while the recorder was running. The two teenagers who had crossed at the south end of the block had stopped at a building entrance halfway down the block. They were not watching the stop. They had learned Marcus understood not to watch stops. Sable ran the plates. They came back clean. Sable ran Marcus's license. It came back clean. Sable ran Marcus through the system. It came back clean. Marcus Webb, no priors, no warrants, no flags. Sable stood at the hood of the patrol car with the radio handset in one hand and the returned information in the other, and looked at Marcus with the expression of a man whose procedure had produced a result he had not expected and had decided the procedure was wrong rather than the decision. Reyes was leaning against the rear fender. He had not spoken. He had looked once at Marcus's sedan, at the recorder and the folder visible through the window. and then had looked at Sable with an expression Marcus could not read at distance, but could measure by duration. Too long for simple agreement, too controlled for simple discomfort. "You always sit parked on corners?" Sable said. Marcus said, "I was eating. At 650 on a block you don't live on." "The block is public," Marcus said. "I ate. I was about to leave." Sable looked at the sedan again. He walked to the passenger side and looked through the glass at the recorder and the folder. He did not open the door. He looked through the glass the way a person looks at something they want to handle, but have not yet found the procedural reason to handle. "What's in the folder?" "Work papers," Marcus said. "What kind of work?" "Administrative." Sable looked at him. "You being smart with me?" "I'm answering your questions," Marcus said. Sable came around to the driver's side. He stood approximately 3 feet from Marcus and looked at him with the specific posture of a man recalibrating. Not backing down, not escalating, recalibrating. Running the calculation again with additional variables and arriving at the same conclusion by a different route. "I'm going to search the vehicle," Sable said. "On what grounds?" Marcus asked. "Reasonable suspicion." Marcus looked at him. The 2 teenagers had crossed to the south side and were no longer visible. The bodega owner had gone inside. The woman with the stroller was half a block north. The block had done what this block did. At 7 on Thursday evenings, it had emptied. "Go ahead," Marcus said. He said it without stepping back. He stood where he was and watched Derek Sable reach for the door handle, and watched Sable pull the door open, and watched Sable pick up the case folder from the passenger seat and look at it. The folder had no name on the outside. It had a case number, a department designation code, and a date range, May 14 to November 14. Sable looked at it. Sable set it on the hood of Marcus's sedan. He did not open it. Sable searched the sedan for 11 minutes. He searched the glove compartment. He searched under the seats. He searched the trunk, which contained a spare tire, a jumper cable, and a canvas bag with a change of clothes. Marcus kept in every department vehicle for 3 years, because you never knew what a surveillance evening would turn into. Sable held up the canvas bag. "What's this?" "A bag," Marcus said. He set the bag down. He came back around to the front of the car. Reyes was still at the rear fender. He had not moved during the search. He had watched in the particular way of a person who has decided the most strategic position available is stillness. Sable stood in front of Marcus and looked at the folder on the hood. "What is this folder about?" "Work documentation. Administrative work." "Yes." Sable picked up the folder. He looked at the outside, the case number, the date range. He moved to open it. "That's departmental property," Marcus said. Sable looked at him. Marcus held his eyes. There was a moment between them. The specific moment in which 2 people are measuring each other, and both know they are measuring each other, and neither has yet decided what the measurement means for what happens next. Sable set the folder back on the hood without opening it. "You're being obstructive," he said. "I have answered every question," Marcus said. "You're impeding a lawful investigation." Marcus said, "An investigation of what?" "Of you." "Of me for what?" Sable looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Turn around." Marcus turned around. He felt the cuffs close on his wrists, with the specific practiced click of someone who has done this many times. And he stood still for it in the way he had been still for everything that had happened in the last 22 minutes. And he thought very clearly and specifically about the folder on the hood of his car, and about the recorder on the passenger seat inside the car, and about a phone call he was going to make as soon as he had access to a phone. He was placed in the back of the patrol car. The folder was left on the hood. Reyes picked it up and put it back inside the sedan before closing the passenger door. Marcus watched this through the rear window of the patrol car. He noted it the way he had noted everything. Precisely, with the specific attention of someone who understands that the notes are the case, and the case is the only thing standing between the next 23 stops and accountability. Reyes had touched the folder. Reyes had handled case evidence. Reyes's fingerprints would be on the outside of a document bearing Marcus's department designation code and the date range May 14 to November 14. This was not a complication. This was, in the specific grammar of an internal affairs investigation, a thread. Marcus sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes forward, and did not acknowledge the thread, because acknowledging it would require acknowledging that he was building it. And he was not, tonight, ready to do that. Tonight he was the subject. Tomorrow he would be the investigator again. The distance between those two positions was the length of a phone call. He had made the call. He looked out the rear window of the patrol car at the corner of Fulton and Lenox, which was retreating as Sable pulled away from the curb. The corner looked exactly like it had looked at 6:48 when Marcus had parked there. The bodega light, the awning, the sodium fixture above the crosswalk, the specific amber of a corner that has been documented 23 times and will be documented now once more. The ride to the precinct took 11 minutes. Marcus sat in the back of the patrol car straight, hands in cuffs, eyes forward. Sable drove. Reyes sat in the passenger seat and did not look back. Neither officer spoke. The radio produced the ordinary noise of dispatch at 7 on a Thursday. A domestic call 2 sectors over. A fender bender on the avenue. The ordinary inventory of things that happened in a city while other things also happened. Marcus listened to it. He was not afraid. He was not angry. What he was precise. He was in the exact situation he had documented 14 other men being placed in, on this route, over the past 6 months, and he was experiencing it with the specific attention of someone who has been watching a thing happen to others and is now inside it. He thought about the phone call. 3 words. Who would answer, and at what speed, and what would happen next? He ran the sequence and found it clean. They arrived at the 39th precinct at 7:11 p.m. The booking area was a room Marcus had been in before. Not as a subject, not until tonight, but as an IA investigator gathering procedural documentation. He knew the desk sergeant's name, Carver. He knew the layout of the holding area. He knew the location of the phone on the east wall. Sable spoke to Carver at the volume of a man who expects the desk sergeant to agree with him. Brought someone in. Failure to comply, obstruction, suspicious vehicle parked at Fulton and Lenox. Carver looked at the form. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Sable. He processed the form. At 7:24 p.m., Marcus was permitted to make a phone call. He walked to the phone on the east wall. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Lieutenant Chen," he said. "It is case event." He hung up. He sat down on the bench along the east wall and put his hands in his lap and looked at the booking room with the measured attention of someone watching a situation approach its conclusion from the inside. Sable was at the desk, still talking to Carver. Reyes had moved to a position near the door to the hallway, far enough from Sable to be unambiguously separate, close enough to claim proximity if required. Marcus noted this. 41 minutes, he estimated. Maybe 35. The 39th precinct booking area at 7:30 on a Thursday was not empty and was not full. There was a man in the far corner doing something complicated with a sandwich wrapper. There were 2 uniforms behind the desk who were not Carver, who had gone somewhere. There was a phone that had rung twice in the last 10 minutes and been answered both times by the same officer, who wrote something down each time and looked up each time with mild professional interest and then went back to what he had been doing. Sable had moved to the far side of the desk. He was writing his report. He was writing it in the specific, deliberate script of someone composing a narrative rather than recording an event. Slower than standard, with small pauses that looked like recollection, but were something else. Marcus observed this from the bench. This was the dark night that the story required. Though it was not dark outside, it was 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday in November, and the fluorescent lights of the 39th precinct booking area were as bright as they always were, which was very bright, the kind of brightness that removes shadows rather than adds them. What Marcus was sitting with, in the brightness, was this. He had documented 23 stops. He had not been able to intervene in a single one. He had watched, in his careful and documented way, as 14 black men were searched on a public street by a man who had never once found anything during those searches. He had watched 6 of those men be arrested. He had looked at their faces in his photographs, the photographs in the folder currently in his car, and had thought, I am building the thing that is supposed to make this stop. The question he had carried for 6 months, and was carrying tonight in a booking room, was whether the thing he was building would actually stop it, or whether it would produce a fine and a transfer, and 3 months of desk duty, and the same pattern at a different corner. He had not answered the question. He did not answer it tonight. What he did, sitting on the bench in the booking room of the 39th Precinct, was observe Derek Sable writing a report, and observe Tommy Reyes standing near the door, and observe the second phone ring at the desk, and observe the officer who answered it, and this time not write anything down, but instead look up, across the room, toward the desk sergeant's area. Sable had not looked at Marcus in 20 minutes. Marcus had noticed this at the 12-minute mark. An officer who brings someone in on an obstruction charge typically maintains a presence, checks on the subject, reinforces the authority of the situation. Sable had not done this. Sable was writing. Sable was, Marcus assessed, writing very carefully. The phone at the desk rang a third time. At 7:52 p.m., the front door of the 39th Precinct opened. Lieutenant Patricia Chen was 51 years old and had run the Internal Affairs Division Unit 7 for 9 years and had, in those 9 years, developed a specific relationship with entrances. She moved through doorways in a way that announced, without speaking, that the room had just become a different room. She walked to the desk. She set a folder on it. It was the same folder, same case number, same date range as the one on Marcus's passenger seat. But this was a second copy, the one Lieutenant Chen had been holding for 6 months. She set her credentials on top of the folder. Internal Affairs, Division 7, she said to the officer at the desk. I need the supervising officer for tonight's booking. The officer looked at the credentials. He looked at the folder. He picked up the phone. Sable had turned from the report. He was looking at Lieutenant Chen. He was looking at the folder. He was looking at the credentials. His face was doing the specific thing that faces do when something categorized as one kind of situation is reclassified as a completely different kind of situation. And the reclassification is not voluntary. Lieutenant Chen turned to look at Sable. She did not scan the room when she entered. She had been to enough precincts in 9 years to know that scanning a room announces arrival as uncertainty. She looked at the desk. She walked to the desk. She put the folder down. She put the credentials on the folder. She did not walk toward him. She did not need to. Officer Sable, she said. Badge 22 Neen, 39th Precinct. Is that correct? Sable said nothing. She opened the folder. The first page was Marcus's cover memo, formal IA documentation, case number, date range, subject name, badge number. Sable's name. Sable's badge number. She said, You arrested the investigator who has been building this case. The individual you brought in tonight is Marcus Webb, Internal Affairs Investigator, 15-year department veteran. Tonight's stop and arrest constitutes the 24th documented incident in an active investigation that the DA's office has been reviewing for 60 days. Sable's hands had gone very still. The anchor, the folder on the desk, open, with Sol's name at the top of page 1, and below it 23 documented incidents, and at the bottom of the last page, a line that read, This case is complete pending one additional corroborated field event. Tonight's event provides that corroboration. Lieutenant Chen looked at Sable. The DA's office will be in contact with your union representative, she said. You are relieved pending review. Reyes, near the door, had taken 2 steps backward. He was no longer near the door. He was somewhere between the door and the wall, occupying a position that was not any specific place. Marcus was released from the booking area at 8:04 p.m. He was not released with an apology. He was released because the supervising sergeant, a man named Dominguez, who had arrived after a phone call from the precinct captain, had reviewed the paperwork and signed the release form and handed it to the processing officer without making eye contact with Sable. Marcus collected his keys, his wallet, his phone. He signed the receipt. He picked up his recorder from the property tray, checked that it was still running. It was, and clicked it off. Dominguez looked at him. "I am sorry for the inconvenience," Dominguez said. Marcus looked at him for a moment and then said, "Write it in the incident report. Everything you observed tonight. Write it in exactly as it happened." Dominguez said he would. Lieutenant Chen was in the hallway outside the booking area. She handed Marcus his badge. 24, Marcus said. She said, 24. He walked out. In the hallway near the exit, he passed Reyes. Reyes looked at the floor. Marcus looked at Reyes for exactly 2 seconds, and then looked forward and kept walking. Outside, a department vehicle was double parked with the engine running. The driver was a junior investigator Marcus had worked with for 4 months. The driver handed Marcus a coffee without speaking. Marcus got in. They drove toward the 4-block radius in silence. This was the false resolution. Marcus released, case confirmed, arrest documented as event 24. It looked like the end. It was not the end. Because the end, in cases like this one, is not the moment the case closes. It is not the moment the arrest is made. The end is what happens in the weeks and months after. In the DA's office, in the union grievance proceedings, in the department's formal review, in the conversations between the desk sergeant and the captain and the commissioner and the attorneys who represent officers like Sable, in proceedings that move slowly enough that the momentum of a single night can dissipate before anything is decided. Marcus knew this. He had known it for 6 months. What he was thinking, driving through the 4-block radius at 8:15 on a Thursday evening, was about the 6 men who had been arrested on this block before him. Not about the case. About the men. About what they had done the morning after. Whether they had called lawyers. Whether they had the money for lawyers. Whether the arrests had appeared in background checks. Whether any of them had lost a job because of what Derek Sable had decided to do on a Thursday evening. He did not know the answers to any of these questions. He had their names in a folder. He had done with those names what the job had required him to do with them. He drove past the corner of Fulton and Lenox without stopping. The DA's office filed charges against Derek Sable 9 days later. The charges were specific and numerous. 24 counts of civil rights violation, under color of law, 6 counts of unlawful arrest, 14 counts of unlawful search and seizure, 1 count of arresting a sworn officer in the course of a lawful investigation. The filing ran 47 pages. The cover page listed the case number that had been on the outside of Marcus's folder for 6 months. The union filed a grievance on Sable's behalf within 36 hours. The grievance cited procedural irregularities in the internal affairs investigation and challenged the admissibility of 14 of the 24 documented incidents. The challenge would take 8 months to adjudicate. Officer Reyes submitted a voluntary statement to the DA's office 4 days after the filing. The statement described in specific detail the stop on November 14th, the approach, the plate check, the search, the arrest. It described 11 other stops Reyes had personally witnessed over the preceding 6 months. It described one conversation between Reyes and Sable 3 months prior in which Sable had said, "You cannot let them think they own the block." Reyes filed for transfer to a different precinct the same day he submitted the statement. Marcus testified before the DA's grand jury on December 3rd. He was on the stand for 4 hours and 20 minutes. He described the 6 months of documentation in precise sequence. The 23 stops he had observed, the notes he had recorded, the dates and times, the names, the outcomes. He described November 14th in the same precise sequence. He described the folder. He described the recorder. He described what he had heard Derek Sable say on a public street and what he had said in return. He was asked, at one point, why he had not identified himself as an internal affairs investigator during the stop. He considered the question for a moment. "Because identifying myself would have ended the documentation," he said. Not the pattern, the documentation. The grand jury returned an indictment. Sable's trial began 7 months after the indictment. It lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days and returned guilty verdicts on 19 of the 24 counts. Sable was sentenced to 4 years and ordered to pay restitution to 5 of the 6 men he had unlawfully arrested. The 6th man could not be located. Marcus read the verdict from a document forwarded to him on a Tuesday afternoon. He read all 19 counts. He read the sentence. He set the document on his desk on the 14th floor of the building where he had worked for 3 years. On his desk was a new folder, a new case number, a new date range that had started 3 weeks ago. He picked up his digital recorder. He clicked it on. Case update, he said. The tape kept running. The floor was quiet. Outside the window, the city ran its Thursday inventory. A bus changing gears on the avenue. A siren 2 blocks east that rose and dissolved before it arrived at anything. The particular compressed sound of a city doing at 8 million simultaneous points. What a city does. He drove out of the parking garage at 6:40. He crossed the bridge with the evening traffic moving in both directions. He turned south on Lenox Avenue with the recorder running and the new folder on the passenger seat and arrived at Fulton and Lenox at 6:52. He parked. He looked at the corner. The bodega was lit. A woman was waiting at the bus stop on the south side. 3 teenagers were crossing at the crosswalk, moving at the easy, deliberate pace of people who have learned the physics of this corner and have found, within those physics, a way to move that is their own. Marcus watched them cross. This was the 3rd time in 3 years Marcus had sat at a corner waiting for a verdict on something he had built. The first time the case had gone to plea. The second time, the officer had been acquitted on the 2 most serious counts and convicted on 2 lesser ones. The union had called both outcomes victories in different years. He did not know what this one would be called. He knew what it was. He knew what 23 stops looked like in a folder. He knew what 6 unlawful arrests looked like on paper. He knew what a corner looked like at 6:52 on a Thursday in November, with a new folder on the passenger seat and teenagers crossing at the mid-block crosswalk. He knew that the 6th man, the one who could not be located, was somewhere in the city, or somewhere else. He had a name. He had a date. He did not know if the man was working or looking for work, or had stopped looking. He did not know if the man had children. He did not know if the arrest had followed the man in the specific quiet ways that unlawful arrests follow people. The background check that came back flagged. The apartment application that was denied. The job that did not call back. He sat with this the way he sat with all of it, not setting it down, not picking it up any further, keeping it at the exact weight it had arrived at, and carrying it forward at that weight. He put both hands on the wheel. He did not write anything down. Not yet.
What you just watched is fiction, but the world that made it feel real is not. A black man sits in a parked car on a public street with documentation of what has been done to his community. The officer who has been doing it stops him. The question this history answers is not whether accountability is possible. It is how long it takes and who pays the cost of the wait. A 2020 report by the Stanford Open Policing Project analyzed over 100 million traffic and pedestrian stops across the United States and found that black drivers and pedestrians were stopped at significantly higher rates than white individuals, even after controlling for neighborhood, time of day, incident rates, and prior incident rates. The report found that the racial disparity in stops was largest during daylight hours, when officers could observe race before initiating contact, and narrowest at night, when race was harder to determine before the stop. A 2021 Department of Justice review of 39th precinct-style enforcement patterns in large urban departments found that in precincts with documented racial disparity in stop rates, supervisors formally reviewed fewer than 12% of stops for procedural compliance. The roots of this pattern extend to the legal doctrine of stop and frisk, formalized in the 1968 Supreme Court case Terry v. Ohio, which permitted police to stop and briefly detain individuals based on reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. What followed in city after city was the operationalization of that doctrine along racial lines. In New York City alone, stops under the Stop and Frisk program peaked at 685,000 in 2011. More than 85% of those stopped were Black or Latino. More than 88% were found to be entirely innocent. A federal judge ruled in 2013 that the program violated constitutional protections against unreasonable search, and wrote in the opinion, "The city has adopted a policy of indirect racial profiling. The internal affairs investigation is not a solution to this history. It is evidence that a person noticed and documented and continued for 6 months without the power to stop a single stop. What changes, slowly, at the cost of documented evidence collected Thursday by Thursday on corners where people have learned not to walk too fast, is the record. Record is not nothing, but the record is also not the same as the corner being safe. That is the gap that numbers cannot close, and that no verdict, however specific, fully crosses.